Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, the place where we learn English through real-world stories and global topics. I'm Adam, and I'm very happy that you've joined us today. Whether you are listening from Asia, Europe, Africa, America, or anywhere else in the world, this podcast is made for you, for everyone who wants to learn English and understand the world at the same time. Before we start, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We love reading your messages and learning about your countries and your English learning journeys. Also, share your thoughts about today's topic, because your opinion truly matters.
That's right, Adam. Welcome, everyone. It's always exciting to have our global family with us. Today we are going to explore a big and serious topic that connects international politics and English learning. The title of today's episode is Trump's Foreign Policy on Trial: The Russia Nuclear Challenge. This may sound like a complex political issue, but don't worry. We're going to explain everything step by step, using clear and simple English. Our goal is not to take sides or make judgments about any country or leader. Instead, our goal is to understand how world leaders make foreign policy decisions and what these decisions mean for peace, communication, and the world we all share.
Exactly, Julia. Many students who learn English also want to understand international news, but sometimes the words in global news can be very difficult. You might see terms like foreign policy, nuclear treaty, or geopolitical strategy in newspapers or on TV, but not know what they mean. That's why today's episode is important. We're going to help you learn the vocabulary of diplomacy and world politics, while also improving your listening and comprehension skills. So today's lesson is both educational and global.
Yes, Adam. And when we talk about foreign policy, we mean the way a country communicates and acts with other countries. Every government has its own way of managing international relations through trade, security agreements, diplomacy, and sometimes negotiation about serious issues like nuclear weapons. During Donald Trump's presidency, his foreign policy became one of the most discussed topics in the world, especially his approach toward Russia. This relationship has a long and complicated history, and understanding it helps us see how world politics works.
That's right. The reason this topic is called On Trial is not because there is a legal trial, but because people around the world have discussed and analyzed Trump's foreign policy, asking questions like, was it successful? Was it different? Did it change how the United States and Russia talk about nuclear power and global security? These questions are still being studied by political experts and journalists. But for us, as English learners, it's a perfect chance to understand new words, ideas, and expressions that are used in international conversations.
Exactly, Adam. And let's remember that the word nuclear doesn't only mean weapons. It's also about energy, science, and global cooperation. The nuclear issue between Russia and the United States is not only about power, but also about peace and safety. For many decades, both nations have signed agreements to limit nuclear weapons and reduce global risk. These agreements are called treaties. For example, treaties like the START and INF agreements are designed to control the number of nuclear weapons and prevent new conflicts. But understanding these treaties requires not only political knowledge, it also helps us develop our English vocabulary in a real and meaningful way.
Well said, Julia. So, in today's episode, we will explore this issue from different angles: what Trump's foreign policy philosophy was, how it influenced U.S.-Russia relations, what the nuclear challenge really means, and how the world reacted. We will also learn useful English words such as diplomacy, negotiation, alliance, and non-proliferation. These are key words that you'll often see in international news, and today you'll learn how to understand and use them naturally.
That's right. This episode is not only for people who love politics, it's for everyone who wants to improve their English while learning something valuable about the world. Remember, English is more than just a language. It's also a tool for connecting people, understanding different opinions, and exploring new ideas. When you learn English through real global stories, you improve your language skills faster and also develop a deeper awareness of the world around you.
Exactly, Julia. And that's why we started the English Globe, to make learning English practical, enjoyable, and connected to real life. We don't just focus on grammar and vocabulary. We focus on using English to understand the big picture of our modern world. So, dear listeners, as you listen today, try to focus on how words are used in real conversations. Notice the expressions we use, and maybe take some notes. Later, you can use these same phrases when you speak or write in English.
And before we continue, let's take a moment to thank all of you, our amazing listeners, for your support. Every comment, every like, and every subscription helps the English Globe grow and reach more learners like you. We love when you tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Maybe you're in India, Brazil, Kenya, Germany, or Afghanistan. Wherever you are, you're part of this global classroom. So please go ahead and tell us, where are you listening from today? And what do you think about today's topic? Do you believe that strong diplomacy can make the world safer? We would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, that's always one of my favorite parts, Julia, reading what our audience thinks. So, friends, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and share this episode with someone who also wants to learn English through global topics. Your support motivates us to bring you new, thoughtful, and educational episodes every week.
Now that we've introduced our theme and prepared our minds, let's begin this journey together. In the next part, we'll travel back in time a little to understand how the US and Russia developed their nuclear relationship, why it became such an important topic in world politics, and how it has shaped modern diplomacy. This background will help us see why Trump's foreign policy toward Russia became such a significant discussion in international affairs.
So, get comfortable, stay focused, and let's dive deeper into this fascinating topic. This is the English Globe, and you're listening to Trump's Foreign Policy on Trial, the Russia Nuclear Challenge. Let's begin our learning journey. Before we understand Trump's foreign policy, we need to travel back in time and explore the long and complex relationship between the United States and Russia. Their connection in nuclear affairs is one of the most important in modern history. It began during the Cold War, a period of political tension after World War II, when both countries competed for global power. The word cold here means that they didn't fight directly, but they competed through ideas, influence, and military strength.
That's a great starting point, Adam. The Cold War lasted for many decades, roughly from the late 1940s until the early 1990s. During this time, both the US and the Soviet Union, which was the name for Russia and its allies back then, tried to prove who was stronger. They built weapons, developed space technology, and supported different countries around the world. This was a time of fear and competition, but it also pushed the world to find new ways to communicate and avoid disaster.
Exactly, Julia. One of the most important parts of this period was the nuclear arms race. That phrase means a competition to create more and more powerful nuclear weapons. Both sides were afraid that the other might attack first, so they kept building stronger missiles and bombs. This created a huge risk for the entire planet. If either side made a mistake, it could start a war that would affect every country on Earth. The fear of such a war led to new discussions about peace and control.
Right, and those discussions led to something called arms control treaties. The word treaty means a formal agreement between countries. These treaties were designed to limit how many nuclear weapons each country could have. One of the first important agreements was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, signed in 1968. Its main goal was to stop more countries from developing nuclear weapons and to encourage peaceful uses of nuclear energy. This treaty is still important today.
Another major step came in the 1970s with the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, known as SALT I and SALT II. These talks were between the United States and the Soviet Union to limit the number of missiles and nuclear launch systems they built. They didn't completely stop the competition, but they created a foundation for trust. Later, more agreements followed, such as the START treaties, Strategic Arms Reduction treaties, which aimed to reduce the number of weapons rather than just limit them.
Yes, and when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the world entered a new chapter. Russia became an independent country, and the Cold War officially ended. Many people believed that a new era of peace was beginning. The US and Russia began working together in areas like nuclear safety, scientific cooperation, and economic reform. However, old tensions didn't disappear completely. Differences in political systems and global influence still existed, and they often reappeared in international discussions.
That's true, Julia. Even after the Cold War, nuclear issues continued to shape the relationship between these two great powers. For example, the START-I Treaty in 1991 required both sides to cut down their nuclear arsenals. Later, START-II and New START built on that progress. The goal was to make sure that both sides had fewer weapons and that each weapon could be tracked and verified. This word verified is very important in diplomacy. It means that both sides check to make sure the other is following the agreement.
And that verification process builds something called mutual trust. It means both countries believe that the other is being honest and following the rules. Without mutual trust, treaties can fall apart. That's why diplomats and scientists from both sides meet often to share information and check progress. This kind of cooperation is essential for global safety. It shows how language, communication, and diplomacy can literally help prevent war. A great lesson for English learners who want to understand real international relations.
Exactly, Julia. But as the world entered the 2000s, new challenges began to appear. Technology was changing rapidly, new nations were growing stronger, and global politics was becoming more complex. The United States and Russia sometimes found themselves on opposite sides of international issues. For instance, disagreements over military activities, cyber issues, and global sanctions created new friction. Yet, both sides still recognized the importance of keeping their nuclear relationship stable.
That balance between competition and cooperation has always defined US-Russia relations. It's like a delicate dance. Sometimes they move together, sometimes they move apart, but they always know that the other's actions affect the whole world. This is a useful expression for English learners. A delicate balance. It means something that is very sensitive and must be handled carefully. Nuclear diplomacy is exactly that. A delicate balance of power, communication, and responsibility.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Julia. And this history is essential to understand before we look at Trump's foreign policy. When he became president in 2017, he entered a world where US-Russia relations were already full of history, complexity, and mistrust. Both nations had strong military capabilities, deep political interests, and a long record of both cooperation and conflict. Understanding this background helps us see why every decision made in that relationship is studied so closely.
Exactly. Many people around the world followed the US-Russia dynamic during Trump's presidency because it influenced global peace and security. The decisions about nuclear treaties, defense budgets, and diplomatic meetings were not just national news. They were global events. For English learners, reading or listening to such topics is an excellent way to improve vocabulary, comprehension, and critical thinking. You learn real words used by world leaders and international journalists.
So, to summarize this section, the nuclear relationship between the US and Russia began in fear but evolved into dialogue. Through decades of communication, treaties, and diplomacy, both nations learned that global security depends on cooperation. The journey from conflict to conversation is one of the most powerful lessons in international history, and for English learners, it's a reminder that communication, not conflict, is the key to solving the world's biggest problems.
Perfectly said, Adam. And now that we have this historical background, we can better understand what changed when Trump became president. His America First approach brought a new style to US foreign policy, one that focused on national interests and strong negotiation. In our next section, we'll explore what that philosophy means, how it shaped his view of Russia, and what it teaches us about leadership and communication in global affairs.
That's right. Stay with us as we continue our educational journey. In the next part, we'll dive deep into Trump's foreign policy philosophy and discover how it tried to reshape America's role in the world, all explained in simple, clear English so you can learn both language and global awareness at the same time. Now that we understand the long and complicated history between the United States and Russia, it's time to explore what made Donald Trump's foreign policy different. When Trump became the President of the United States in 2017, he entered office with a very strong and unusual message, a phrase that became central to his political identity: America First. This slogan was simple, but it carried a deep meaning. It represented his belief that every decision in foreign policy should first benefit the American people, their economy, their security, and their interests in the world.
Yes, Adam. The phrase America First sounds patriotic, but in international politics, it can be quite complex. It means putting the nation's interests ahead of global cooperation in some areas, which can sometimes cause tension with allies or international organizations. Trump's approach was not based on traditional diplomacy, which often focused on building multilateral partnerships. Instead, his strategy often favored bilateral discussions, meaning one-on-one negotiations between two countries. This way, he believed he could get better deals for the United States.
Exactly, Julia. That word you used, bilateral, is very important for our English learners. Bilateral means between two sides or two countries. It's the opposite of multilateral, which means involving many nations or parties. Trump preferred bilateral agreements because he felt they gave him more control over negotiations. He often said that the United States had been treated unfairly in previous global agreements and wanted to renegotiate many of them. The word renegotiate means to discuss again or to change the terms of an existing deal.
And this approach became clear in his first year of office. Trump questioned several existing international agreements, including some that had been in place for years. For example, he expressed doubts about the benefits of the Paris Climate Agreement. He criticized the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, for what he called unfair financial contributions. And he also raised questions about long-standing nuclear treaties with Russia. These actions made many world leaders wonder how US foreign policy might change under his leadership.
That's right. What made Trump's foreign policy especially interesting to study is his unique communication style. He often preferred direct language instead of traditional diplomatic speech. In diplomacy, leaders usually speak very carefully, using polite and balanced words to avoid conflict. But Trump's language was often straightforward and sometimes confrontational. For English learners, this provides an excellent example of how communication style can influence meaning, and how tone, emotion, and directness can change how messages are received internationally.
That's an excellent point, Adam. Trump's style was very different from his predecessors. For example, previous presidents often focused on long-term alliances and global institutions. Trump, however, wanted quick results and visible achievements. He viewed international relations in a more transactional way. That means he looked at global cooperation as a series of deals, where each side should give something and get something in return. This kind of thinking comes from his background in business and negotiation. It's a very deal-making mindset.
Yes, And that brings us to another useful English word, negotiation. It means the process of discussing something with another person or country to reach an agreement. In diplomacy, negotiation is one of the most important skills a leader can have. Trump often described himself as a strong negotiator who could get better outcomes for his country. This style worked well in some situations, but created uncertainty in others, especially when dealing with sensitive topics like nuclear weapons and relations with Russia.
And that's where things became more complicated. The relationship between the US and Russia has always required careful and thoughtful diplomacy. Nuclear treaties are built on trust, verification, and long-term commitments. But Trump's approach sometimes seemed unpredictable to other world leaders. The word unpredictable means hard to guess or not easy to foresee. Some analysts said this could be a useful strategy, keeping opponents unsure about your next move, while others thought it could make international relations unstable.
Exactly, Julia. This difference of opinion is what made Trump's foreign policy so widely discussed. For some, his methods were refreshing, a sign that the United States was defending its national interests more strongly. For others, his style seemed to weaken traditional partnerships. However, what cannot be denied is that his approach forced many countries to rethink how they interacted with the United States. This is a great example for English learners to study how language, tone, and attitude can shape not only conversation, but global politics.
Absolutely. Another key aspect of Trump's foreign policy was his view on international institutions. He often believed that large organizations like the United Nations or NATO were not always fair to the United States. He wanted other countries to share more responsibility for global defense and peacekeeping. This reflects a term often used in political discussions, burden sharing. It means that all members of a group should share the costs and responsibilities equally. Trump's focus on burden sharing was one of his main talking points in many speeches.
Yes, and this philosophy connected directly to how he viewed Russia. Trump believed that talking directly with Russia's leadership could help reduce tensions and create new opportunities for cooperation. He often said that having a good relationship with Russia would be beneficial for everyone. However, this approach received mixed reactions. Some experts thought it was smart diplomacy to open dialogue, while others worried it could make the U.S. appear too soft on a traditional rival. The truth, as always, is complex and depends on how one interprets international events.
That's right. In English, when we talk about interpretation, we mean how people understand or explain something. Two people can see the same event but interpret it in very different ways. This happens often in international relations. Trump's actions toward Russia were interpreted differently by different audiences. Some saw them as pragmatic, meaning practical and realistic, while others saw them as risky. For English learners, this helps us understand that vocabulary like pragmatic, cautious, assertive, or strategic often appear in discussions about diplomacy.
Exactly, Julia. And that brings us to another important part of today's learning, the vocabulary of power and negotiation. When you read news articles about foreign policy, you'll often see words like strategy, diplomacy, influence, negotiation, sanctions, and alliances. These words are powerful tools for describing how countries interact. Trump's foreign policy gives us a real-world example to learn these terms in context. It helps us see how language reflects power relationships and political goals.
That's a great point. For example, the word sanctions means official actions taken by one country to punish or pressure another country, often by limiting trade or financial activities. Trump used sanctions frequently as part of his foreign policy strategy. He believed they were a strong and peaceful way to influence other nations. For learners, it's important to see how such words are used, not just in textbooks, but in real political speeches and news reports. It helps make English learning more alive and relevant.
So if we look at Trump's overall philosophy, we can summarize it like this. He believed in national strength, direct communication, and results-based diplomacy. His America First idea focused on protecting the country's interests first, but it also meant changing how the U.S. worked with its partners and rivals. This shift created both new opportunities and new challenges, especially in dealing with Russia and the ongoing nuclear issue, which we'll explore in more depth soon.
Yes. And what makes this topic especially useful for English learners is that it shows how language and leadership are connected. Every world leader communicates their vision through words, and those words shape how the world responds. By studying political language, you don't just improve your English, you also develop critical thinking skills and a better understanding of world affairs. And that's exactly what the English Globe aims to teach: global awareness through language learning.
Beautifully said, Julia. In our next section, we'll move into one of the most sensitive and important parts of U.S.-Russia relations, the Russia factor, cooperation or competition. We'll see how these two powerful nations interacted during Trump's presidency, what the nuclear challenge really looked like, and how both cooperation and rivalry played a role. It will be a deep and educational discussion full of useful vocabulary and insights for English learners everywhere. Now that we understand Trump's overall foreign policy approach, let's move into one of the most fascinating and complicated parts of his international strategy: the relationship between the United States and Russia. This relationship has always been full of both cooperation and competition. It's like two great powers standing on opposite sides of a river, sometimes reaching out to shake hands and sometimes pulling back with suspicion. During Trump's presidency, this dynamic became one of the most talked about subjects in the world.
Yes, Adam. The Russia factor is central to understanding Trump's foreign policy. When Trump took office in 2017, US-Russia relations were already tense because of several international issues. However, Trump often expressed that he wanted to get along with Russia. He believed that having friendly ties could benefit both nations and even help solve global problems like terrorism and nuclear security. This idea sounded positive, but many people questioned whether such cooperation was realistic, given the long history of mistrust between the two countries.
Exactly, Julia. The word mistrust is important here. It means a lack of trust or confidence in someone. For decades, both the US and Russia have been suspicious of each other's intentions. Even though they signed agreements and worked together in certain areas, both sides have always been cautious. They often looked at each other's actions through a strategic lens, a way of thinking that focuses on long-term goals and possible threats. This attitude has shaped their communication style and diplomatic behavior for generations.
That's a good explanation, Adam. And it's important to remember that the US-Russia relationship is not just about politics. It's also about power, influence, and global balance. The world often watches how these two nations behave toward each other, because their relationship can affect many other countries too. For example, when the US and Russia agree on something, like nuclear arms control, it can make the whole world safer. But when they disagree, tensions rise globally, and international security becomes less stable.
That's very true. During Trump's presidency, his comments about Russia surprised many people. He spoke about President Vladimir Putin in a way that was more open and less confrontational compared to previous American leaders. Some saw this as a new approach to diplomacy, while others believed it showed too much friendliness toward a traditional rival. This is an example of how perception plays a big role in foreign policy. The word perception means how something is seen or understood by others. In diplomacy, perception can sometimes matter as much as reality.
Exactly, Adam. Because foreign policy is not just about what you do, it's also about how the world interprets what you do. Trump's meetings with Russian officials and his public statements about cooperation created a lot of discussion. Some people hoped this would open new doors for nuclear talks and reduce global risks. Others worried it might send the wrong signal to allies who were expecting the US to take a tougher stance. It was a balancing act, a test of how far cooperation could go without weakening national or allied interests.
That's a great way to put it, Julia. A balancing act. It means a situation that requires careful control between two opposite goals. Trump wanted to explore better relations with Russia, but also needed to maintain strong ties with U.S. allies like the European Union and NATO. At the same time, he had to deal with political pressure at home. Many American institutions were skeptical of Russia's actions in global affairs. So, while he aimed for cooperation, there were always elements of competition and caution underneath the surface.
And this mixture of cooperation and competition made the relationship extremely complex. On one hand, Trump often praised the idea of talking directly with Russia, arguing that communication was better than conflict. On the other hand, his administration still approved sanctions against Russia, especially in response to international concerns about security and regional influence. This shows an important lesson in diplomacy. Leaders can use both friendly and firm approaches at the same time, depending on the situation.
That's a powerful point, Julia. For English learners, this helps us understand two important diplomatic words: soft power and hard power. Soft power means using culture, dialogue, and influence to achieve goals peacefully, while hard power refers to using military or economic pressure to influence others. Trump's relationship with Russia included elements of both. He used strong economic tools like sanctions, which are part of hard power, but he also tried to use soft power through direct dialogue and personal diplomacy.
Exactly, Adam. The mix of soft and hard power is often called smart power. It means knowing when to use pressure and when to use persuasion. Successful diplomacy usually requires both. Trump's administration faced the challenge of balancing these strategies. Some parts of his government preferred a tougher approach, while Trump himself often spoke about the importance of understanding Russia's perspective. This difference in tone created confusion, but also made his policy interesting for analysts and students of international relations.
And for English learners, it's useful to note how different verbs describe diplomatic action. Words like strengthen, cooperate, negotiate, pressure, and engage are all part of this vocabulary. They show the various tools leaders use in foreign policy. For example, Trump said he wanted to engage with Russia. That means to communicate or take part in a discussion. But at the same time, the U.S. also continued to pressure Russia through sanctions and international policies. These verbs are important to understand because they express very different diplomatic tones.
Yes, and beyond the words, we can also see how tone and communication shape relationships. Trump's way of speaking about Russia was more personal than usual for a US president. He often talked about his good relationship with Putin, suggesting that direct contact between leaders could solve bigger problems. This is an example of personal diplomacy, when leaders rely on personal communication rather than formal institutions. Some experts think this can make progress faster, while others say it can ignore important checks and balances.
Exactly, Julia. Personal diplomacy can sometimes open doors that traditional diplomacy cannot. However, it also depends heavily on trust, personality, and public perception. If people feel that a leader is too close to another foreign power, it can raise concerns at home. This happened during Trump's term. His desire for better relations with Russia was interpreted in different ways. Some saw it as visionary, others as controversial. But what's important for our listeners to understand is that diplomacy is rarely black or white. It's full of gray areas.
That's right, Adam. The term grey area means a situation that's not clearly right or wrong, not clearly good or bad. International politics is full of these grey areas. The relationship between Trump and Russia was one of them. There were moments of cooperation, like discussions about nuclear arms control, and moments of tension, such as disagreements over global conflicts and regional security. For English learners, this shows how language can describe uncertainty and complexity, two very real features of diplomacy.
And another interesting thing about this period is how the world watched every move closely. Global media reported every meeting, every statement, and every handshake between Trump and Russian officials. This is what we call media diplomacy, when international relationships are influenced by how they are shown in the media. The coverage of Trump's interactions with Russia shaped global opinion, not only about his foreign policy but also about how international trust is built in the modern world.
Exactly, Adam. And that's a great observation for language learners. Words like coverage, narrative, perception, and image are essential when we talk about global communication. These words describe how events are presented and understood by people. Trump's foreign policy toward Russia was often described using these terms because the public image of diplomacy can sometimes be as powerful as the diplomacy itself. What people believe about a leader's relationship can influence how nations behave toward each other.
That's so true, Julia. To summarize, the Russia factor in Trump's foreign policy can be seen as a constant balance between cooperation and competition. His administration maintained sanctions and cautious policies, yet Trump himself spoke about improving relations and finding common ground. The combination created a policy that was both firm and flexible, unpredictable yet strategic. It showed the world that even among rivals, communication remains essential, and that diplomacy, like language, is all about how we choose our words and tone.
Beautifully summarized. Adam. This section gives us an important lesson, that diplomacy is not only about agreements or conflicts, but also about understanding perspectives. Even nations that disagree deeply can still communicate, because dialogue is the only way to move toward peace. For English learners, it's also a reminder that mastering language is about more than grammar. It's about expressing ideas, emotions, and respect, even in the most complex situations.
Exactly, Julia. And in our next section, we'll take a closer look at what this whole nuclear challenge actually means. We'll explore how treaties like START and INF work, why they matter for global peace, and how Trump's decisions affected their future. It's going to be a fascinating and educational discussion, packed with new vocabulary and real-world understanding.
In this part of our discussion, we are going to take a deep and careful look at one of the most complex but important issues in global politics, the nuclear challenge. When we talk about nuclear weapons, we are not just talking about technology or defense systems. We are talking about the power to destroy cities, the balance of fear that keeps peace, and the agreements that try to prevent disaster. Understanding this topic helps us not only learn about international politics, but also practice key English vocabulary that connects language learning with real-world knowledge. So, let's take it slowly and explore what nuclear treaties like START and INF mean, why they exist, and how they shape global peace.
That's a great introduction, Julia. To start, let's define what we mean by nuclear treaties. These are formal agreements between countries to control or reduce the number of nuclear weapons they have. The goal of these treaties is to prevent an uncontrolled arms race, a situation where countries keep building more and more weapons to stay ahead of their rivals. The word arms here doesn't mean human arms. It means weapons. So an arms race is literally a race to produce more and stronger weapons. After World War II, the US and the Soviet Union entered such a race. Both sides built thousands of nuclear weapons, each trying to have more power than the other. This created global fear because even one mistake could have led to total destruction.
Yes, and that's exactly why treaties like START and INF were created. START stands for Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. The purpose of this treaty was to limit the number of long-range nuclear weapons that the US and Russia could have. These are the weapons that can travel across continents and cause massive destruction. The first START treaty was signed in 1991, at the end of the Cold War. It was a historic moment because both sides finally agreed that the arms race had gone too far. By reducing their nuclear stockpiles, they hoped to make the world a little bit safer and to show that cooperation was possible even between former enemies.
That's right, Julia. The second important agreement is called the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This one was signed earlier in 1987 by U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The INF Treaty focused on banning an entire class of nuclear weapons, those that could travel between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. These missiles were especially dangerous because they could be launched quickly and strike targets in Europe or Asia in a very short time. By agreeing to remove them, both sides took a major step toward reducing nuclear tension. It was a turning point in history and became a symbol of how dialogue can replace fear.
Exactly, Adam. And that's why these treaties are often called cornerstones of global security. The word cornerstone means something very important that supports the whole structure, like the main stone at the base of a building. Without it, everything else becomes weaker. In the same way, without these treaties, the system of global peace and trust could easily collapse. The US and Russia together possess most of the world's nuclear weapons. When they agree to reduce or limit them, it sets an example for other nations. When they disagree, the world becomes more unstable.
Yes, and that brings us to some key vocabulary that helps explain how nuclear policy works. The first term is non-proliferation. The word proliferation means spreading or increasing rapidly. So non-proliferation means stopping the spread of nuclear weapons to more countries. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, often called the NPT, was signed in 1968 to achieve exactly that. It divides countries into two groups, nuclear and non-nuclear states. The nuclear states agree not to help others develop such weapons, while the non-nuclear states agree not to build them. In return, all countries are encouraged to use nuclear energy only for peaceful purposes, like electricity generation or medical research.
That's an excellent explanation, Adam. And the NPT, together with treaties like START and INF, creates what we can call a web of protection. This web helps to slow down or stop the arms race you mentioned earlier. Let's repeat that phrase for our English learners. Arms race, a competition between countries to have more and better weapons. It's one of the key reasons why treaties exist. If one country increases its weapons, others feel they must do the same to defend themselves. This cycle can continue endlessly and dangerously. Treaties help to break that cycle by creating trust, limits, and verification systems, ways to check that both sides are following the rules.
Yes, and another important term in this discussion is deterrence. The word deterrence comes from the verb to deter, which means to discourage or prevent someone from doing something. In nuclear strategy, deterrence means having enough power to make your enemy afraid to attack. The idea is that if both sides know that using nuclear weapons would destroy them both, they will avoid starting a war. This balance of fear is sometimes called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It sounds strange, but for many years, this fear actually helped keep the peace between nuclear powers. Deterrence doesn't mean you want to use the weapons. It means you want others to think twice before attacking you.
That's an interesting point, Adam. It shows how language and psychology both play a role in international relations. The word deterrence has a deeper meaning. It's not about violence, but about preventing violence. It's about maintaining peace through strength. But this idea also has its critics. Some experts argue that depending too much on deterrence can be risky because it relies on fear, and fear can lead to mistakes. That's why treaties like START and INF are so valuable. They don't just rely on fear, they rely on cooperation and verification. They include systems for both sides to inspect each other's weapons and make sure no one is secretly breaking the deal.
Exactly, Julia. And for our listeners, the word verification means checking or confirming that something is true. In the context of nuclear treaties, it means sending inspectors or using technology like satellites to confirm that both sides are following the agreement. Verification builds trust, and trust is the foundation of peace. Without verification, treaties would only be words on paper. With it, they become real tools for stability. This is one of the biggest lessons of international diplomacy. Trust must always be supported by evidence.
And speaking of trust, it's important to note that these treaties are not just technical documents, they are symbols of hope. They show that even countries with deep conflicts can sit down and find common ground. However, during Trump's presidency, many of these treaties came under pressure. The United States withdrew from the INF Treaty in 2019, saying that Russia had violated its terms by developing new types of missiles. This was a major turning point because it marked the end of one of the most successful arms control agreements in history. For many observers, it raised the question, if these treaties collapse, what will replace them?
That's a big question, Julia. When one treaty ends, it often creates a vacuum, a space with no rules or limits. And in international politics, a vacuum can be dangerous because other countries might rush to fill it by building new weapons or forming new alliances. This is why many experts and diplomats around the world are calling for renewed dialogue and new forms of cooperation. They argue that the principles of START and INF, reduction, transparency, and verification, are still essential for peace, even if the exact treaties change.
Yes, and this is where language becomes so powerful. Terms like arms control, disarmament, non-proliferation, and deterrence are not just words. They represent human efforts to control fear and power. They remind us that peace is not automatic. It must be built, maintained, and renewed again and again. Every generation of leaders must decide whether to continue cooperation or return to competition. And every generation of citizens, including our listeners, should understand these concepts, because nuclear policy affects everyone on this planet.
You're absolutely right, Julia. For English learners, these terms are also great examples of academic and diplomatic vocabulary. They appear in news articles, political speeches, and international reports. Let's repeat a few of them together for our audience. Non-proliferation, arms race, deterrence, verification, and disarmament. Each word carries a big idea behind it. Understanding them helps you follow global events and also express complex opinions in English. That's the real power of language learning. It allows you to engage in global conversations.
Beautifully said, Adam. So, to summarize, nuclear treaties like START and INF are vital tools that limit weapons, build trust, and promote peace. They reduce the chances of an arms race and provide systems for verification. They support the larger goal of non-proliferation and show the importance of deterrence in maintaining stability. But above all, they remind us that communication, honest, open, and respectful communication, is the most powerful weapon of all. Without it, treaties fail. With it, even the deepest divisions can be healed.
Perfectly concluded, Julia. In our next section, we'll explore how Trump's decisions and policies affected these treaties, what changed, what remained, and what that means for the future of nuclear diplomacy. So stay with us, dear listeners, and remember to keep practicing these new terms. Understanding them doesn't just make your English stronger, it also makes you a more informed global citizen. Now that we've understood the meaning of nuclear treaties and how they work, it's time to explore how the rest of the world reacted to the changes during Donald Trump's presidency, especially in relation to US-Russia nuclear discussions. Whenever a major power like the United States changes its position on nuclear policy, it immediately affects the entire global system. Other countries start to reassess their own strategies, their alliances, and their security plans. The word alliance is important here. It means a formal partnership or friendship between countries, often created for defense, trade, or political cooperation. Throughout modern history, alliances have been one of the strongest tools to maintain global balance.
Exactly, Adam. The United States has long been part of several powerful alliances, the most famous being NATO, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is a group of countries from North America and Europe that promise to defend each other if one of them is attacked. During Trump's presidency, many European nations were uncertain about how committed the US remained to this alliance. Trump often said that some NATO members were not paying their fair share for defense spending, and he wanted them to contribute more. This caused diplomatic tension, especially in countries like Germany and France, which have historically depended on the US for security guarantees.
Yes, and that brings us to another key term for our listeners: diplomatic pressure. This phrase means when one country tries to influence another country's actions through political or economic means instead of using force. For example, when the United States withdrew from the INF Treaty, many European governments used diplomatic pressure to encourage both Washington and Moscow to return to negotiations. They feared that without the treaty, new nuclear missiles could once again be placed in Europe, just like during the Cold War. European leaders urged both sides to protect stability and avoid starting a new arms race on their continent.
That's true, Adam. For countries like Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states, the end of the INF Treaty was not just a political issue. It was a matter of national safety. These countries are geographically close to Russia and could be directly affected by any new missile deployments. Their reaction was one of concern and caution. Many European diplomats began calling for multilateral talks. Let's explain that phrase. Multilateral means involving more than two countries. So, multilateral talks are discussions or negotiations where several nations participate together to find a common solution. Unlike bilateral discussions, which involve only two sides, multilateral diplomacy aims to include everyone affected by an issue.
Yes, and multilateral talks are often seen as a more balanced and democratic approach to solving global problems. For example, the United Nations is one of the biggest platforms for multilateral discussions. During the Trump administration, many European nations preferred this kind of dialogue, hoping to bring together not only the US and Russia, but also other major powers like China, France, and the United Kingdom. The goal was to build a broader framework for arms control, one that could adapt to the modern world, where technology and new weapons systems are rapidly changing the security environment.
And while Europe was reacting with concern and diplomacy, Asia also had its own perspectives on the situation. Countries like China, Japan, and South Korea followed the developments very closely. China, for instance, was not a member of the INF Treaty, but it was indirectly affected by it. The US argued that the treaty no longer made sense because it didn't include China, which was developing many new medium-range missiles. Trump's administration said that any future arms control agreement should include China as well. This proposal was controversial, but it highlighted the changing global balance of power. It also introduced a new dynamic to the nuclear conversation, one that connected not just the US and Russia, but Asia too.
That's a really interesting point, Julia, and it also helps explain another important English word, geopolitics. The term geopolitics combines geo, meaning earth or geography, and politics. It refers to how geography influences political and strategic decisions. In this case, the geography of Asia plays a big role in how countries view nuclear policy. For example, Japan and South Korea are both close to North Korea and China, two countries with growing missile programs. Any change in US-Russia arms control affects them because it can shift the overall balance of power in their region. That's why Asian governments often respond carefully, emphasizing stability and dialogue.
Exactly. Japan, for instance, has always been a strong supporter of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. As the only country in history to experience nuclear attacks, Japan's position carries moral weight. Its leaders called on all nuclear powers to continue dialogue and to preserve agreements like the New START Treaty. which remained one of the last surviving arms control deals between the US and Russia. South Korea also took a diplomatic approach, urging both nations to avoid escalation and to focus on cooperation. For these countries, nuclear policy is not just an abstract idea. It's a real security concern that affects their future.
And while Asian nations were calling for peace and balance, other parts of the world also had their own views. In the Middle East, countries like Iran and Israel watched closely, since U.S. nuclear policy often shapes the wider global environment. If the great powers reduce their weapons, it strengthens the international norm against proliferation. But if they abandon treaties, it can encourage others to question the rules. That's why diplomats everywhere were paying attention. The U.S. decisions under Trump's administration were seen not only as national choices, but as signals to the entire world about the future of arms control.
That's a key observation, Adam. And it reminds us how interconnected global security has become. The term interconnected means that everything is linked. What happens in one region can affect others. Nuclear policy is a perfect example of this. When the US withdrew from the INF Treaty, it was not just an issue between Washington and Moscow. It had ripple effects across Europe, Asia, and beyond. This shows the importance of understanding how foreign policy decisions have global impacts. These are excellent phrases for our English learners. They appear often in news reports and international discussions.
Absolutely, Julia. And there's another word that often appears in these discussions: credibility. In diplomacy, credibility means being trusted or believed. When a country makes a promise or signs a treaty, its credibility depends on keeping that promise. Some international observers worried that when the U.S. withdrew from major treaties, its credibility as a global leader might weaken. They wondered if other nations would still trust American commitments. This debate became one of the defining features of Trump's foreign policy. The question of whether his direct and transactional style made America stronger or less predictable in the eyes of the world.
And that unpredictability, or uncertainty, was both a strength and a weakness. Some countries believed Trump's tough style could force others to negotiate new deals more quickly. Others thought it made long-term cooperation harder. For example, in Europe, some diplomats saw Trump's approach as a wake-up call, a reason for Europe to develop its own independent security policies instead of relying too much on the US. This led to renewed discussions about European defense integration, showing that one country's policy shift can inspire others to change direction too.
Yes, that's a very good example of how global politics evolves. The phrase policy impact means the effect or result of a government's decision on other countries or global systems. Trump's approach clearly had wide-reaching policy impacts. Some nations strengthened their military alliances, others focused on diplomacy, and some even began modernizing their own defense systems to prepare for uncertainty. These reactions remind us that the world is always adjusting. Every decision in one capital city can set off changes in many others.
That's the beauty of studying international relations through English learning. When we read terms like alliances, diplomatic pressure, and multilateral talks in the news, we can now understand what they really mean in practice. We see that diplomacy is not just about formal meetings or speeches. It's about managing relationships, balancing power, and protecting peace. It's a continuous process that requires communication, understanding, and trust. And all these elements depend deeply on language, the words leaders choose, the tone they use, and the messages they send to the world.
Exactly, Julia. And this is what makes our topic so relevant for English learners. The language of diplomacy is precise, polite, and strategic. It teaches us not only new vocabulary, but also new ways of thinking. When we study expressions like to exert diplomatic pressure or to strengthen an alliance, we are learning how nations communicate without conflict. These skills are valuable not just in politics, but in everyday life, at work, in education, or in cross-cultural communication.
Beautifully said, Adam. So, to summarize this section, Trump's approach to US-Russia nuclear discussions brought mixed global reactions. Europe emphasized diplomacy and multilateralism. Asia focused on regional stability, and the wider world observed carefully, aware that every treaty and policy sends a message about global trust. The key takeaway for our listeners is that in international relations, communication and cooperation matter as much as military power. The words alliance, multilateral talks, and diplomatic pressure represent real actions that shape peace and stability around the globe.
Perfect summary, Julia. And dear listeners, as we continue, we'll explore how these global reactions influenced new debates about security, technology, and the future of arms control in the modern era. We'll also introduce more advanced English terms to help you understand global news with greater clarity and confidence. Stay tuned for the next part of the English Globe, where we'll connect the dots between diplomacy, defense, and language learning, making you not just better English speakers, but smarter global thinkers.
When we talk about foreign policy, it's not only about leaders and governments, it's also about how information is shared with the public. In today's section, we're going to explore how the media covered President Trump's foreign policy toward Russia, especially regarding the nuclear issue. Understanding how the media shapes public perception is a key skill, not just for English learners, but for global citizens who want to think critically and form balanced opinions. Many English learners read or watch international news every day, but they often take information as absolute truth. Our goal here is to help you see how stories are framed, what kind of words are used, and how different countries can report the same event in very different ways.
That's a great point, Julia. Let's begin with a key term: narrative. In simple words, a narrative means a story or version of events. When the media reports something, they choose which facts to highlight, which to omit, and how to describe them. For example, one newspaper might say a meeting between US and Russian leaders was productive, while another might call it controversial. Both describe the same event, but the words create different feelings and impressions. For English learners, this is an excellent opportunity to notice tone, perspective, and how language shapes understanding.
Another important term we should learn is perception. Perception means the way people see or understand something. The media plays a big role in shaping perception because it helps people form their opinions about world events. For instance, if the news often uses negative words when talking about a country, audiences might start to see that country in a negative way. Learning English through news helps you understand not only vocabulary, but also how communication can influence emotions and judgments.
That's very true. And another key word to learn is public opinion. This refers to the general views or beliefs held by the public on certain issues. Public opinion can affect government decisions, especially in democratic countries. During Trump's presidency, public opinion about his approach to Russia was divided. Some people believed he wanted to improve relations, while others thought his policies were too soft. Understanding how public opinion forms helps learners see how language, politics, and communication connect.
For English learners, analysing how different media outlets report the same story is a great language exercise. Try reading 2 or 3 articles about the same event from different international sources. Look for differences in words, tone, and focus. For example, one headline might say US and Russia renew talks, while another says tensions rise despite diplomatic talks. Both are grammatically correct, but the message and feeling are very different.
Exactly. This is what we call critical thinking. It means not accepting everything you read or hear without question. When you read news in English, think about who is writing it, what the goal is, and what kind of audience it targets. This doesn't mean we should distrust all media. It just means we should be thoughtful readers and listeners. This kind of practice improves both your English skills and your awareness of world events.
So, dear listeners, as you continue your English journey, remember that understanding media language gives you power. You will learn not only vocabulary, but also how stories shape people's minds. Words like narrative, perception, and public opinion are used everywhere in global news and discussions. The more you understand these terms, the more confident you'll be when reading, writing, or talking about international topics in English.
That's beautifully said, Julia. In our next section, we'll look at how political communication works between nations, how leaders use language in diplomacy, and what English learners can gain from studying those interactions. But for now, remember, every news story is also a language lesson, and every word carries meaning beyond grammar.
Welcome back, dear listeners. In this section, we are going to focus entirely on English learning. Today, our topic is the language of diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of managing relationships between countries, and it uses very specific words and expressions. By understanding this language, you can improve both your vocabulary and your understanding of international news. Many words used in diplomacy also appear in academic texts, interviews, and global discussions, so learning them will help you in many areas of English.
That's right, Julia. Let's start with our first important expression, mutual agreement. The word mutual means shared by two or more parties, and agreement means a decision or contract that everyone accepts. Together, mutual agreement refers to a decision that both sides support. For example, in international talks, we might say, the US and Russia reached a mutual agreement on reducing nuclear arms. Repeat after me. Mutual agreement. Notice the stress on the first syllable of mutual. Mutual.
Very good, Adam. The next phrase is conflict resolution. This is a term used to describe the process of solving a disagreement or problem peacefully. Conflict means a serious disagreement or argument, and resolution means a solution. In diplomacy, leaders often work on conflict resolution to avoid war or tension. For example, we can say, the summit focused on conflict resolution between neighboring countries. For pronunciation, repeat, conflict resolution. Stress is on the first syllable of conflict and the second syllable of resolution.
Another useful phrase is peace dialogue. This refers to conversations or negotiations aimed at maintaining or achieving peace. Dialogue means a discussion between two or more parties, and when combined with peace, it emphasizes solving problems without violence. For example, the peace dialogue helped both nations reduce tensions. Pronunciation tip: peace dialogue. Stress the first syllable of dialogue. This is a common phrase in news reports about international relations, so it's very useful for English learners.
Yes, Adam. Let's also talk about policy framework. A policy is a plan or set of rules, usually created by a government or organization. Framework refers to a structure or system that supports something. Together, policy framework describes an organized plan that guides decisions and actions. For example, the new nuclear policy framework provides guidelines for future negotiations. Pronunciation tip: POLIC, framework. Stress the first syllable of policy and the first syllable of framework. This expression is common in both diplomatic and academic English.
Let's also introduce some smaller but useful words often used in diplomacy. Words like negotiate, implement, agreement, cooperation, and compromise appear frequently. Negotiate means to discuss something to reach an agreement. Implement means to put a plan or decision into action. Cooperation means working together. And compromise is when each side gives up something to reach a solution. Example sentences help. Countries must negotiate carefully. Leaders implement treaties step by step. International cooperation is essential for peace. A compromise was reached after long discussions.
Exactly, Adam. These words are not just vocabulary, They are tools to understand and express ideas clearly. In diplomacy, tone is also important. Words like collaborate, engage, discuss, and consult are used to show respect and avoid aggressive language. For example, instead of saying, "We demand this," diplomats might say, "We seek to engage in discussion." This shows how polite, precise language is a key part of international communication.
Yes, Julia. And pronunciation is also crucial for learners. For example, negotiate. Stress the second syllable. Negotiate. Cooperation. Stress the third syllable. Cooperation. Compromise. Stress the first syllable. Compromise. Practicing these words aloud improves speaking and listening skills and helps you understand news or academic discussions more easily.
Let's also practice a few full sentences that combine these terms. The leaders reached a mutual agreement after a long peace dialogue. Conflict resolution requires negotiation and compromise from all parties. The new policy framework encourages international cooperation and dialogue. Practicing these sentences helps you use the words naturally in conversation and writing.
Absolutely, Julia. Dear listeners, learning diplomatic vocabulary does not only help you understand politics, it also improves your academic English, professional communication, and global awareness. Phrases like mutual agreement, conflict resolution, peace dialogue, and policy framework will appear in news, reports, and discussions. The more you practice, the more confident you will be in reading, listening, and speaking about complex global issues.
Exactly. Remember, diplomacy is all about using the right words at the right time. Practicing these expressions will help you think clearly, speak politely, and understand international news without confusion. Keep repeating the words, practice sentences aloud, and try to use them in your own discussions. By doing this, you are not only improving your English, but also preparing yourself to understand global issues like the ones we've discussed in this podcast.
Perfectly said, Julia. In the next section, we'll look at how Trump's foreign policy decisions affected long-term diplomacy and what lessons we can learn for the future. We'll connect these ideas back to English learning so you can continue improving both language skills and global understanding.
Dear listeners, we have reached the final section of today's podcast. Throughout this episode, we have explored the complex topic of Trump's foreign policy toward Russia, particularly focusing on the nuclear challenge. We have discussed treaties, diplomacy, global reactions, media narratives, and the language of international communication. But the main goal was not only to understand these issues, it was to use them as a tool to improve your English. Learning about global events gives your language practice context, making new vocabulary, expressions, and sentence structures much easier to remember.
Exactly, Julia. One key lesson for English learners is the importance of exploring international news critically and independently. When you read articles, watch news videos, or listen to podcasts, don't just accept information at face value. Think about the words used, the tone, and the perspectives presented. Terms like policy framework, diplomatic pressure, narrative, mutual agreement, and public opinion are not just vocabulary words. They are keys to understanding how global events unfold. Practicing English while analyzing these topics sharpens both language skills and critical thinking.
Yes, Adam. Another important point is balanced learning. When studying complex subjects like nuclear diplomacy or international relations, it's essential to remain neutral and focus on comprehension. Understanding context is crucial. For example, knowing what a treaty like START or INF represents, why countries negotiate, and how leaders communicate helps you understand the world more clearly while expanding your English skills. The phrases, idioms, and technical vocabulary we use today appear in newspapers, journals, and international reports, so learning them gives you an advantage in both language and knowledge.
And remember, dear listeners, English is not just a tool for conversation or travel. It's a tool for global awareness. By combining language learning with topics like diplomacy, treaties, and media coverage, you can engage with the world in a deeper way. You develop the ability to discuss international events, write about them, and even think analytically in English. This approach transforms language learning from memorizing words to understanding the ideas behind them.
Absolutely. Lifelong learning is the ultimate goal. Whether you are reading the news, listening to podcasts, or discussing world events with others, using English as a medium gives you access to countless resources. It allows you to learn from different perspectives, understand cultural nuances, and participate in global conversations confidently. And the more you practice, the stronger your vocabulary, comprehension, and critical thinking become.
So, dear listeners, our message today is simple but powerful. Use English to explore the world. Pay attention to context, analyze information critically, and connect your language learning with real-life topics. Every article you read, every podcast you listen to, and every conversation you have in English is a step toward greater understanding and knowledge.
And remember, learning English through global topics is not just about improving language. It's about becoming more informed, thoughtful, and confident in engaging with the world. Topics like nuclear diplomacy, international treaties, and foreign policy may seem difficult at first, but breaking them down with clear explanations and relevant vocabulary makes learning both effective and enjoyable.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the English Globe. We hope you have learned valuable English words, expressions, and phrases, while also gaining insights into global affairs. Keep practicing, stay curious, and remember that language learning and world awareness go hand in hand.
Before we finish, we kindly encourage you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and how you plan to use English to understand the world. Your participation helps us create more educational content tailored to your needs.
Thank you once again, dear listeners. Keep learning, keep exploring, and use English to discover the world around you. Remember, every new word, every new idea, and every new perspective brings you closer to becoming a confident, knowledgeable, and globally aware English speaker.
Goodbye for now, and stay tuned for more episodes of the English Globe, where language and global knowledge meet to help you learn, grow, and succeed.